say hello, leavers and believers and all the listeners. They really didn't want us looking back, did they? But we are going to be taking a look back. Right back today. Thank you so much for joining us at Leaving Hillsong. My name's Tanya, and today, after last week's intense financial and legal kind of conversation, I thought we'd just have an intense and possibly legal conversation with Luke, who I recently met. And he seems nice enough, I don't know. So the question that comes out of this for me as a parent is, what would you do if you had to choose between your child and your deepest belief system? Because that's literally what happened to Luke's family. And it's these kinds of stories that people just don't hear, they don't know about, and that can be just so life-changing. And we do talk about sexuality, and we do talk about abortion, gay conversion therapy, and exorcisms, and everything that was kind of normal to us as Pentecostal kids. So, welcome to a 1-star review with Luke. Here's part 1. I'm really excited that Luke is with us today. Luke got in contact after actually stumbling on this podcast, I believe. He didn't know that our little community existed, our little motley crew of ex-evangelicals. So he's been thinking and remembering, and we've had a few conversations. He's got a fair bit to say, and I know some highlights, but I'll be learning as we go about you, Luke. Welcome to Leaving Hillsong.
Hi, Tanya.
From what we've discussed, you were an AOG kid and then went to a smaller CLC. The trip to Hillsong is multifaceted. So
yeah, look, I have a long and sordid history in the AOG and the Pentecostal movement. Let me just start right now by saying that the patriarchy of Pentecostalism is coming down, baby, like the walls of Jericho.
You think?
Yeah, look, I started, I guess, my Christian journey, because my God, it was a journey, growing up in a little AOG church in the southwestern suburbs of Sydney called Berea Christian Life Centre. When Berea collapsed after accusations of fraud and mismanagement of money and abuse of children, my parents picked us all up and moved us over to Mount Annan Christian Life Centre, which was under the leadership of Mr. and Mrs. Adrian and Kathy Gray. Now, I've got to tell you, man, if you've ever seen a photo of Adrian Gray, that porn stash, my God. They all had it back then.
Oh.
They really, really did. Brian, John McMartin, bloody Adrian Reedike, a lot of them, they all had it. Must have been something about the 80s. Like, Mount Annan was a little bit out of range of where my parents lived. So we kind of looked for something a little bit closer. And of course, the obsession with Pentecostal churches from my father led us to the cesspool now currently known as Inspire Church, formerly known as Christian Life Centre Liverpool, under John and Carol McMartin.
John McMartin. What is...
Yes, Mr. Johnny Mac.
And what was that like? So how old are you at this point when you joined the old McMartin gang?
I would have been in my late teens, I reckon maybe about 15, 16. So I'd gotten past the impressionable stage, and now I was at the point where I was looking for some real leadership in my life. I was looking for somebody whose idea of Christianity wasn't going to church and putting your hands in the sky and then coming home and dropping every second word being an F-bomb.
Okay.
And I thought Christian Life Centre might have been the place where we would find that. What I didn't realize was that my last name wasn't McMartin, so there were no opportunities for me.
Okay. I mean, how many people are at this church when you're going to it? It's not that big, is it?
Look, it probably would have been, at a guesstimate, probably around 800 to 1,200 people. So it was one of the bigger ones outside of Hills Christian Life Centre at the time. And it was growing really quickly. They'd started their little outreach and, pretending like they actually cared about the local community. There were integrations that were similar to where Hillsong was maybe 10 years earlier. Like CLC was starting to look towards running their own Bible college. And before we go anywhere, can I tell you that instead of calling it a Bible college, They gave it one of the grossest names of any school I've ever heard in my life. They called it Sydney Training Institute.
Oh, wow, that's clever. You do, I've got to say, you do sound, I mean, there's going to be people out there that are going to be going like, this guy's so bitter and angry and he's had a bad experience. You're using quite extreme negative words here. What happened?
Extreme behavior warrants extreme responses. Now, look, I was involved with Fire Zone, which was the name of their youth group under the leadership of a really lovely guy, at least I thought so at the start, by the name of Tepper.
Okay.
And it was a fun time, like I looked forward to Friday nights and, we had mosh pits and, like praise and worship was like heavy metal music. And we were all moshing down the front. The sweatier you got, the closer to God you were.
No,
it was this
really?
crazy thing. Like you see this stuff at concerts and they were trying to emulate that in the gym that they had at CLC where the youth group was being held. And, there's a good couple of hundred kids going to it.
You weren't out at this point, were you? You weren't an out and proud gay man.
No, I was definitely questioning myself a fair bit. Probably one of the hardest parts about being gay and growing up in the Christian world is that you forever live with this fear that there's this big bloke with a lightning bolt rod in one hand and a big stick in the other, and he's just waiting for you to drop to your knees before he whacks you over the back of the head with a stick. And, like that constant feeling like, I'm not good enough because I keep quote unquote falling. Don't you love the use of the word fall these days when it comes to these big preachers and their moral fall? But it was really hard and it was really depressing as a young teenage guy because all I can think about is how much of a letdown I must be to this God.
Oh, because you were a true believer, yeah? I mean, you're in.
Oh man, I was a tongue-talking, born again, bloody hands in the air, mosh jumping.
Okay.
Wanted to be a preacher, Pentecostal Christian. I wanted to do the whole thing. I wanted to, there's this idea. I think we were talking the other day about it. Saying this idea that everyone who's bitter against Hillsong is only bitter because they want to be like Brian. Well, no, they didn't want to be like Brian. They wanted to feel like they were closer to God like Brian.
Yeah.
At this point, I had no idea what the hell Hillsong was or Hills Christian Life Centre was. My whole life revolved around Berea, Mount Annan, and then Liverpool Christian Life Centre. So my whole world, my God, Tanya, I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons as a kid because my parents didn't want The Simpsons to teach me how to dishonor my parents.
Wow.
Yeah. We had friends who my parents grew up with, and they had kids, and their kids weren't allowed to watch The Lion King because, and wait for it, reincarnation.
It's I mean, I wouldn't let my son watch Friends, but that's because of Jennifer Aniston and Nicole Kidman. I'm just digressing. I don't know what people are thinking, but I get it. Like, it's our normal. That was our normal. See, I don't find that shocking. I find that kind of normal. I'm a bit older than you. Happy Days was considered quite obscene in my house, so I get you.
Yeah, I remember the first episode that I watched of The Simpsons was because I walked into the lounge room one day, and for the first time in my life, I had the chops to clap back to my dad. So, already gone to hell. There's a 10 commandment broken. Dad's sitting there watching The Simpsons, and I walk in, sit down, watch it with him. He's like, "You can't watch this." I'm like, "Well, you bloody well are."
That's odd, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it's the contradictions that are so difficult.
See, because at that point, he was too old to dishonor his parents. There's this point where you're allowed to dishonor your parents when you're an adult. You're just not allowed to do it when you're a kid, right?
Well, I know. I think it's until you die, but it's so, isn't it so that your days will be long in the land? Like, and really, the days are so long as it is.
Let's not start talking about cherry picking Christianity, yeah?
Cherry pick all day long. I mean, you ended up dating women, right? Like,
there's a couple of girls that I dated, and there was this kind of idea in my head that like dating a girl is going to help me with these. And they weren't quite urges at this point; they were piqued interest, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So there was a girl that I did actually date. My parents were not particularly keen on it, which I thought was really weird because my parents did actually at one point before I started dating this girl find gay porn on my dad's computer. Oh. Yes, I was on IRC chat channels watching gay porn. The weird thing to me though was that my parents were so delusional about what was going on that they thought it was my sister watching it, not me. So she got in trouble for it.
Why would your sister? Okay.
I don't know. It was really bizarre.
Cognitive dissonance works in wonderful, wonderful ways.
Oh, absolutely. There was a girl at Liverpool Christian Life Centre that I did fall in love with. Her name, well, I don't need to go into who she was.
Hi, nameless girl.
It was really odd to me that given what my parents had found on their computer, they were so against me having a girlfriend.
Right.
Like in my naturalized brain now, my worldly brain right now, I think, oh, okay, this gay guy's gone out and got himself a girlfriend. More power to you, buddy. But my parents were so hell-bent to keep us apart for as long as they could. And it just didn't work. The more they pushed us apart, the more we wanted to get into bed with each other, and we did.
Excuse me.
And things kind of got to that point where, we were thinking about maybe getting married. And bearing in mind, I'm 17 at this point, yeah? So we broke up because after 2.5 years together, she fell pregnant and then got an abortion without telling me. She took that choice away from me, which really upset me. And look, I understand that women's body is women's choice. I get that. But I felt like I could have been a part of that conversation at least, because we were still together at that point. This was something that would have impacted on both of our lives because we had planned to stay together. So things didn't really work out after that. And, we kind of broke up and she went and saw other people. And in my heartbreak, I started kind of, leaning a little bit towards the homosexual tendencies that I already knew that I was starting to share. And let me tell you, that poster from TV Week magazine of 1997 of Dieter Brummer from Home and Away with his shirt off, leaning against a car, that was my gay fantasy.
Excellent. I mean, that's what we're all about here. At least it wasn't Owen Wilson. So, Oliver Sholem.
Rest in peace, brother.
Yeah. Did McMartin claims that he started the
McMartin definitely claims that he started it. Although, look, the more I think about it, the conversation of how the church was started was very rarely ever spoken about because there was this real sense when I became aware of Hillsong and when I became aware of their music, because obviously everyone finds out about Hillsong because of their music, yeah? When I became aware of Hillsong and what they were and what they were doing and the movement that they were at that time, because they were just starting to pick up speed. They were very quickly becoming a mega church at this stage. There was this almost violent detachment between Hillsong and Liverpool Christian Life Centre.
Okay.
Like, it felt like out of protest, we're not going to sing Hillsong songs, we're going to write our own. And I remember when You Are My World came out was around the time that Liverpool Christian Life Centre went, yeah, okay, cool, we can do that too. And they recorded their own album.
Okay. Aww.
And obviously, as we all know, it charted like no one ever heard of it.
Right.
No one ever found it. No one, like, it just into nothing.
See,
but
how come Hillsong music succeeded in all these other places that weren't?
Do you know why? Is because what I think Hillsong did so well that other places didn't do well is Hillsong took God out of the performance.
Yeah. Okay, so
for Hillsong, it was a concert. It wasn't a church service. They called it praise and worship, but what it was the best of the best musicians in the country. And let's be honest, they had the best of the best people on the stage there, yeah? Like at this point, Marty Sampson had just finished up with Bloody Youth Alive and had moved over to Hillsong. And, like You Are the Chosen One, that Chosen One album that Youth Alive released. The Delirious was starting to get really big, like this is that time where all of the music was mainstream and that was just so important that we had a tune that was so catchy and the radios would almost play it. And in some cases, the radios did play it. But this is the thing. CLC at Liverpool, and I'm sure other churches as well, kind of tried to emulate that, but they just didn't have the skill set. Because if you were a good enough musician, you weren't sticking around at a little CLC down in bloody South Sydney. You're going to Hillsong.
Okay. No, that makes sense. That makes total sense. That must have angered the leaders there. They mustn't have been too impressed.
Well, look, the reason why I know that there was some animosity between Hillsong and CLC is because of the reason why I got kicked out of CLC. I've been an event manager by trade. I love events. I love putting them together. I love running them. I love music. I love performance art, all that kind of stuff. That's my jam. And it probably comes from the fact that my father used to be Steve Grace's tour manager. So, if anyone knows Steve Grace is probably going, oh my God, that name, haven't heard that for decades. But Hillsong Church were running some youth fundraiser. I can't even remember what it was called back then. And I had a chat to a friend of mine, a guy who was a singer at Liverpool CLC, who every time I stayed over his house, he would want to cuddle with me and was a bit off-putting. So he was in the praise and worship team. Right. And I approached him and said, hey, I want to do this thing. We go to this Caribbean restaurant in Parramatta. We charge people a ticket. And then whatever the profits are, I'll split them between this, between the Hillsong's thing and our thing. Because I had friends who were going to Hillsong, and I thought, it's a great way to support the community. And in my mind, I'm thinking we're all here for Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
So let's share the profits to really kind of, bump things up a little bit. CLC didn't like that. CLC didn't like the fact that I was pulling people away from CLC to go and do things to benefit Hillsong. So after the fundraiser event and after CLC got a very small amount of money and Hillsong got a very small amount of money, because you pay costs on an event, you very rarely make a profit anyway. Tepper, youth pastor, took me to a cafe up in Carnes Hill in Sydney.
No. Oh, not the cafe.
And
okay. It's usually
it was really weird, right? Because at this point I was working with children's ministry with the children's pastor Alice, who, I thought she was my mentor. Like I was starting to preach every second Sunday in kids' church. I was running nighttime kids' church, it was my whole thing. Like I really loved getting up and speaking the word of God to these kids and inspiring kids to, live their best life through their schools. And I mean, of course I knew what I was saying was all bullshit, but you want to kind of sit there and believe it with all your heart and hope that what you're saying is true. So when we arrived at the church, Tepper was waiting out front of the church. So my dad went in to meet with another pastor named Jim Primisic. Lovely guy, and honestly, probably the only Pentecostal pastor I would ever actually say was a good person. So Tepper was waiting outside. Dad went in to see Jim. I saw Alice, my children's pastor, my mentor, walk out, and I said, "Hi, Alice," and she blanked me and just walked off.
Oh dear, okay.
I never saw her again. Tepper put me in his car, drove up to Carnes Hill, and said to me, "Mate, you're pulling people away from God's will. You are literally leading our sheep astray.
Wow.
We can't have you here. You're banned from coming back."
Oh, honey. Wow.
And in that same conversation, what I didn't know is that at the same time, Jim, who my dad was meeting with, was being told by another pastor named Mike Myers. Yeah, how's that for a pastor's name? Mike Myers. Being told by Mike Myers that he can't come back. You can't bring him back.
Okay.
In fact, we want you to sever all ties with him.
What?
And if you don't, we will remove you from leadership positions within the church.
What?
Now, let's not get delusional here. When I say leadership positions, my mum was in a senior leadership position. Do you want to guess what her job was within the church?
Tell me.
She was a cafe manager. My dad was one of the prayer warriors. Woo, girl. My dad was one of the prayer warriors. Hallelujah. There are so many things that happened at this church, like when my parents got the inkling that I was gay. Well, look, suffice it to say that I've only re-engaged with my parents about maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay. When they got their leadership positions thrown at them, what happened then? How did they react? I mean, what did you do when all this happened?
Well, I mean, I picked up and moved to bloody Balcombe Hills area.
Okay.
Obviously to start going to Hillsong Church because I needed a church. That was my identity.
Right.
And look, mum and dad retained their leadership positions. What can I tell you?
What? They've cut contact with you?
For a while.
They listened to him and cut their son off.
Yep, because that's what God would want, right?
Oh man, these people.
But there was so many crappy things that happened there. Like when my parents got an inkling that I was gay, they had a conversation with Jim Primisic, who, and I kid you not, sat me in his office and attempted on multiple occasions to cast legions of gay demons out of me.
Oh, honey.
Literally legions and legions of gay demons. And apparently I had a lot of them and they were hanging on like they didn't want to go anywhere. Look, right now at this point, it sounds like a pretty great party.
It sounds like the most
terrible. At the time, it was horrific. Look, Tanya, it was horrific because like I said, all I wanted to be was a good Christian guy. I wanted to be someone who answered the call. I wanted to be close to God. I didn't want to be in trouble with God all the time. And that I think my whole journey through Berea, with Adrian Reedike, through Mount Annan, which in all fairness to Mount Annan, we didn't have a huge amount to do there. We probably were only there for a year or two. And to my recollection, nothing untoward happened there. But I mean, it is a CLC, which wasn't that established by Brian too?
I mean, that's interesting because Brian was just preaching at Casey Treat's church this week saying how he founded Liverpool CLC. And
can I just say how hot Casey Treat's son is?
Listen, this is
just
not,
saying.
I mean, do you know what I mean? Whatever. It's like, this is not leaving Hillsong Pornhub. So Oh,
Probably the most notable thing for me was, and obviously for those who don't know, John McMartin has actually just gone through a court case where it's been alleged that he sexually assaulted a woman. And apparently, my understanding is that he said something along the lines of, on the night that happened, he had consumed something like 16 or 19 alcoholic beverages, which there's something wrong with the Pentecostal patriarchy when their excuse is to rely on alcohol. I drink a lot of alcohol too, but the things that I do when I drink on alcohol, I'm responsible for. I don't try to use the fact that I was drunk to get away with it, yeah? But the thing that really kind of struck me as typical McMartin CLC was when his son Brendan took over as the senior pastor. Now, I grew up Luke and Brendan McMartin and Lauren McMartin, and I'll tell you right now, when Luke McMartin got up and preached at the youth group, which he eventually took over from Tepper, one of his very first sermons was a sermon titled "Don't Piss on Your Tree."
Ew. What was he meaning?
And the whole concept was, God has given you a tree. That tree is your gifts and your abilities. Do your best not to piss on it. Now, the reason why I remember that was because, one, I had never heard anyone use that kind of language on a pulpit before. But two, because he went off on a tangent during that sermon where he was talking about how, you know, how when you go into public toilets and someone pissed on the toilet and you have to wipe the toilet off? Yeah, well, that doesn't wipe all the piss off, so you're still sitting on the anyway, so don't bother wiping.
Wow.
These are the things that the eldest son of my senior pastor, who is now my youth pastor, was saying on stage. He was an arrogant, horrible, egomaniacal who knew that because he had the McMartin last name, he could do anything, he could say anything, and McMartin would always back him. And this was the thing. When I have a look at the way that church was run, everything rose and fell on John McMartin's word. There was no elder.
Okay.
There was no leadership team. There was a leadership pastoral team. My understanding was that their involvement in the decision-making process was always at the pleasure of King McMartin.
I mean, so what? There's no elders?
Yeah, not to my knowledge, and like I said, if there were, their impact was severely mooted. You know, like you hear about the elders who had just stepped down at Hillsong Church, and you know, like the board of directors and all that kind of crap that's going on over at Hillsong at the moment. And it's like, yeah, look, I don't think that could ever happen because, as is evident by the fact that John McMartin steps aside and the first person that steps into Philly's shoes was Brendan McMartin. Now, let me tell you, there were some other really good people in that church who might have actually made better choices, who might have been a better option, but they would never have been considered because their last name wasn't McMartin. Nepotism was rife in that church. And even though my dad was a true believer, even though my dad absolutely was sold on the whole thing, he was the man who taught me the word nepotism as it related to the McMartin boys.
Okay. I mean, we see that everywhere, though. I mean, and they always seem
to if your name's McMartin or Pringle, or it doesn't matter what it is. Isn't it interesting that all of the heads of all these quote-unquote mega Pentecostal churches are all currently under siege?
Well, interesting is a word.
You got Houston, you got McMartin, you got Guglielmucci, you know, all of these names are unknown in the quote-unquote secular world because they're all fighting or have quite recently fought some pretty friggin' serious allegations.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of those allegations revolve around two things: sex and money. I thought the church was supposed to be a haven from that.
And exploitation and concealing, covering things up, trying to hide things, be it money or sex. Or the abuse of.
Well, look, and from what I read in some of the conversations I had during the court case, I could be wrong, was that McMartin said that the first person he told about his quote-unquote transgressions, I love those words, they're transgressions if you're a pastor, they're deadly sins if you're not. But his transgressions, the first person he told was his son, Brendan.
Do we have another case of someone?
Oh, it's Frank and Brian all over again.
Oh, man.
It's history repeating itself all over again. And it's any wonder that Frank, not Brian, calling you out, Mr. Houston, it's any wonder that Frank was the guy who established the CLC brand and franchise.
Yeah. There's been nothing but bad fruit from that bad tree.
And look, I do genuinely think that that's the reason why Liverpool CLC changed their name from Liverpool CLC to Inspire Church, because they wanted to distance themselves from that CLC brand, that poison chalice. But the unfortunate thing is, when you're, I guess in the words of Luke McMartin, when you've already pissed on your tree,
Ew.
Like,
Ew.
it's the same tree, guys. You can call it an apple tree or an orange tree.
Yeah, don't be using their own logic on them, please. They can't be handling that. Wow. So, I mean, you sound like an angry young man.
No, you know what? I'm not. I'm cathartic about the whole process. I'm happy in who I am right now. And it took a long time. It took a really long time. But I'm happy about my life. You know, I live a good, healthy, prosperous life. And, you know, for my whole teenage and young adult life, I thought the only way to live happy and prosperous was if I was giving 10% plus more to my church.
You use such extreme terms. You're passionate about your feelings towards them.
It's extreme behavior.
Uh,
People are literally there to be used and abused by these so-called churches.
Yeah.
You know, like you can't, oh, sorry, John, you'll cop your punishment. You'll be fine. I'm sorry, you belong in jail.
It's just incredible. And I mean, the fact that I don't think it was a special occasion to have drunk 19 drinks as well. There's that ongoing alcoholism mixed with exploitation.
Here's the thing though, Tanya, right? Think about the reason why they kicked me out of the church and then ask yourself why they haven't kicked John out of the church. And the reason why is because mine was about money. John's was only about sexual assault. Not to downplay it, but you know what I mean? Like, my thing was about money.
Do.
That hit John right in the hip pocket.
Right. Yeah, that's where it hurts. That's where it hurts. Trust me. I mean, you know, when I found out all this stuff about Frank and, you know, Hillsong was founded by a pedophile and so the book came out and I was waiting for interviews to tell people, and pretty much all they asked was, where does the money go? People just care about the money. This thing is just a money machine.
That's a byproduct of the fact that for decades, that's what the church's focus has been on. Money. Now, here's an interesting thought, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about Hillsong Church and the fact that Brian has been removed from Hillsong Church, apparently he is not allowed to come back.
Well, I don't know.
I went into Hillsong Church's website the other day because I wanted to check something. If he's been removed from Hillsong Church and they've disavowed him from their leadership team, and they're basically trying to distance him with Mr. and Mrs. Dooley getting up there constantly talking to Amanda and Robert Ferguson, talking in a plumb British accent about how, you know, the best is still yet to come. But if they have actually disavowed themselves from Brian, why is there still some of Brian's material for sale on their website?
Yeah, it's
because it's about money.
It's a really strange relationship. I don't know that he's been completely removed from the company globally. It's all sort of messy and murky and unclear, isn't it? It's just
look. It definitely feels from the passive aggressive, venomous tweets coming from Mrs. Houston that they have been removed. You know, there's some really vitriolic language being used there by both of them on Instagram, and yeah, I'm here for it. I love seeing adults eat their own babies.
It's
you know, like
they're just displaying themselves. I mean, we all reveal ourselves on social media one way or another,
absolutely.
But wow.
It's nice to get it off my chest. And this is the thing, like, I know you're saying that I'm being really ferocious with my words. It warrants a ferocious response.
Of course it does. Of course it does.
Because what they're doing is disgusting and it needs to be called out for the absolute hideousness that it is.
I'm with you. I am just devastated. It's revolting. I mean, the reason that I keep bringing it up is one of the things that, you know, happens when people walk away from a church. So one of the major things that people say is that, you know, Brian loved always to say people were angry and bitter and like they had a bad experience and they were blaming the church. So interesting to hear your passion, as it were.
That's a really interesting idea. I've worked in hospitality for 26 years. And if enough people leave my restaurant a 1-star review, then that represents a trend, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but consider this a 1-star review for Pentecostalism. There you go. There's the title of your bloody of this weekend, a 1-star review for Pentecostalism.
Just settle. Back off. I mean, when we were talking before, we agreed we were going to drop some names, and by drop I mean like throw them over the balcony. One of the you mentioned a traveling evangelist that was a particular influence on your life. That he's very prominent, but he's not really attached. Do you want to start with someone who had that profound effect on your life?
Yeah.
Who doesn't love a good cliffhanger, hey? What else have you got to look forward to? We're going to talk about some bigger names in part 2 of a 1-star review. Please like, share, subscribe, donate, help, all the nice stuff. And we'll get stuck into it as soon as possible. I think you can take a couple of guesses at who we're heading to with next. And some of Luke's input may well surprise you. So thank you so much for listening. Look out for part 2. And as always, be kind to yourself, keep being kind to each other, and keep living Hillsong. We'll talk then. Bye.